This webinar is now being recorded.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I am Kenny Voss, and I will be your moderator today. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar on MoDOT's budget and financial forecast. Our goal with these webinars is to ensure employees receive the technical training necessary to successfully deliver projects in the future. I have a few housekeeping items to go over before we get started. We are scheduled for an hour and a half today. This includes time for the presentation and time for questions. We are recording today's webinar and we'll place the recording in MoDOT for future reference. This webinar will also be added to the course catalog of the Program Delivery Training Program and the MoDOT YouTube channel. All lines are muted during the presentation. The question and answer function will be open, so I encourage you to send questions to all panelists in the question and answer pod. We will break after the presentation to address questions from the Q&A pod. The presenters will also take verbal questions at this time. We have 3 reference documents for today's webinar that are linked in the question and answer pod for your reference. I also mentioned as we were leading up to the 12:30 start that several people have logged in with their first name. So if you were one of those people that logged in with your first name, please send an email to Charlotte Drinkard so that you can say what your login name was, and she can go ahead and make sure that she gets you registered for completing this training in MoDOT U. So without further ado, for today's webinar, we will have 2 presenters from our Financial Services Division. I am pleased to introduce Todd Grosvenor, who is the Financial Services Director, and Janelle Lucanati, who is the Financial Services Administrator. At this time, I will hand it over to our opening presenter, Todd.
Thank you, Kenny. Your agenda here says Budget 101 and Financial Forecast. We're actually going to switch that up a little bit. I'm going to talk about the financial forecast, and then Janelle will talk about the budget. Okay, financial forecast. Next slide, please. This is some exciting stuff, and I'm glad. I thank you for the opportunity to be able to be part of this webinar this afternoon. I've lived the financial forecast here at MoDOT for over 25 years. Way back in the 1900s, I was putting the financial forecast together. You'll see this graphic here a lot of times when we talk about anything to do with finances here at MoDOT. They're pieces of the puzzle, and if we do it right, they all fit together like this one shows here on the screen. We start with the financial forecast, and that's the financial backbone for the department. It's got the money flowing into the department and out of the department. And from that, we come up with our spending plans, our budgets. That's for the operating budget for the districts and the divisions. And then the majority of the money where we spend on the roads and bridges is the STIP, the Statewide Transportation Improvement Program, our capital program. Now, a sound financial forecast with monitoring throughout the year, that provides financial stability to the department. And remember, that's one of our pillars, safety, service, and stability. We never include revenues that have not already been approved and authorized to be collected in any of our forecasts. So last year when they were talking about the new gas tax, we did not put that in any forecast until it was fully passed and signed by the governor. And you'll see that in this presentation today. And we never have more disbursements than we have revenue coming in. Our financial forecasts are always balanced with revenues and disbursements. And we always have a minimum state road fund cash balance of $250 million. That's our target minimum. Next slide, please. Kenny mentioned there was a couple of handouts, attachment 1 and attachment 2. The first one there on the left-hand side, we refer to that as our assumptions page. And then the one on the right there, the table of numbers. These are the actual documents that we give to the commission when we present the financial forecast. The financial forecast is presented to the commission in January. It's informational only, though. It's not actually, there's no action taken on it to approve it. The formal approval of the financial forecast comes when the budget is approved in June, and then when the STIP, the draft STIP, and then the final STIP is approved in July. If you've ever watched, well, now we're virtual, if you ever watched one of the commission meetings or been in one of the January commission meetings, we go through the financial forecast pretty fast, and there's not a whole lot of questions. And I don't know if you've ever wondered why there's not more questions about how we're spending $3 billion. The reason why is because there's usually a workshop the day before, and it's an opportunity to provide more detail to the commissioners. The commissioners ask us a lot of questions. We have dialogue about the different assumptions, and we provide a lot more detail. So again, attachment 1 are the assumptions, which you can go through each one of our revenue sources and disbursements, and the bullet points are there, kind of guides you through what we come up with to build this financial forecast. And then from that, the numbers that get created from those assumptions, excuse me, are shown on the right. And what happens is, I'll put a plug in for my Diet Mountain Dew here, excuse me. This financial forecast is for the STIP from 2023 to 2027. When we present it in January, we give the year before the STIP cycle and the year after. So that's why you've got those multiple years in here. The financial forecast establishes the STIP funding targets, the operating budgets for the districts and divisions, and this is all for the next fiscal year. So this forecast right here will actually start July 1 of this year, the beginning of state fiscal year 2023. The actual forecast, though, actually starts being built almost a year before. We started to build this forecast in August of 2021. And we start with the only fact on attachment 2. The only fact on there is the beginning cash balance. We know what the cash balance was on July 1, 2021. And that's the very first column in the upper left-hand column of it, that 1.296 billion. That's the only fact on that piece of page. Everything else is going to be, the actuals are going to be different, guaranteed. We have monthly variance reports to help us monitor our forecast, whether it's the revenues or the disbursement side of it that we track throughout the year. The revenue forecast variances are reported monthly to executive leadership, and quarterly they're in Chapter 6 of the tracker. We present that on the quarterly on the state revenue, and then annually on the federal revenue, which we take questions from the gallery and from the exec team, how we're doing on those assumptions. Next slide, please. So when we start to build the forecast, the first thing we need to look at is the revenues. And what we're going to do is step through all the different revenue sources. And I'm a kind of visual guy, so I like charts. This first one here is our motor fuel tax. That's the 17 cents that you pay at the pump. That's historically been MoDOT's cash cow. It represents 46% of our state revenue. Now, MoDOT doesn't get the full 17 cents. We have to share that with cities and counties. The first, even to confuse it, the first 11 cents of the tax is split 75-25. And then the 6 cents that was passed in 1992, that's actually split 70-30. The additional 5% for local was picked up by the city of St. Louis. And the most recent Senate Bill 262 passage, it's split 70-30. So right now, the state gets 12.45 cents, or about 73% of the 17 cents. And then as Senate Bill 262 grows, which we'll talk about later, that ratio will actually get higher. The revenue is based on gallons purchased. So in Missouri, it's about 4 billion gallons of fuel is purchased. 75% of that is gasoline and 25% of that is diesel. And this is very timely to talk about this right now. If gas is $2 a gallon, the tax is 17 cents. If it's $4 a gallon, which we're seeing today, it's still 17 cents. We get that question a lot. When gas prices go up, the revenue doesn't go up because it's stuck at 17 cents per gallon. Really, when the gas prices go up to $4 a gallon, the revenue goes down people stop driving and they stop buying gas, and the revenue actually goes down. The highest amount we've ever received was back in 2006, and it was $520.8 million, which is, well, I guess it would still show on this chart, but it'd be pretty close to the top there. Now, 16 years ago, and we all know that in the last 16 years, the VMTs have grown tremendously. There's a lot more people on the road, but the vehicles have gotten more fuel efficient, which this revenue source for long term is a bad revenue source for us. It's not only on the state level. The Highway Trust Fund in DC is actually funded majority by fuel taxes. So as cars get more fuel efficient and we start getting more electric vehicles, this revenue is going to continue to go down. So the chart that we got here shows the actual for the last 11 years. That's the blue line. The forecast from last year is the red line, and then the green line is the current forecast. Now, you look at the blue and you're hoping you can build some kind of trend, but you kind of get the old crap feeling when you look at this. You really can't build a trend off of this. Starts out in 2011 and then drops like a rock in 12, 13, and 14. Starts to rebound a little bit in 15. And then we had some good years there in 17, 18, and 19. And then, as everybody knows, COVID came to see us in 20 and 21, and it dropped again. The other thing that this thing shows me is back in 2012, 13, and 14, you can probably guess our gas prices were $3 to $4 a gallon, and that's when it dropped. And that's kind of what we're up against now. From 16, 17, 18, 19, and into 20, gas prices pretty well stayed right at $2 a gallon or hovered a little bit over that. So the gas price does really impact how much revenue we get on this. So the red line, I'll talk about that forecast first. Now, last year when we came up with this, we assumed a negative impact of COVID to the motor fuel taxes. We hoped that we could kind of hold our own from 20 to 21, kind of staying flat, and then kind of recover in 22 and 23, and then kind of decline from there with the fuel efficient vehicles beyond that. The actual impact of COVID was negative, as we know now. People stopped driving. VMTs went down starting, in March, April, and May. The country was locked down. We weren't driving to work. We could work from home. We weren't going to restaurants. We were eating at home. Our entertainment, we weren't going to movies. We were doing everything at home. We were all stuck at home. So our revenue dropped like a rock. As you can see there in 2021, it went down to $492.2 million. And that's a 2.9% or a $14.5 million drop from 20 to 2021. I mean, it's almost as low as it was back in 2013 and 14. So when this year rolled around for our forecast, we hope that we could rebound a little bit in 2022. So we went back to 2020, kind of pre-COVID. And the thing that's weird about motor fuel taxes is there's about a 2-month lag. So, we all were sent home in March of 2020. There's a 2-month lag in the motor fuel tax revenue. So that really didn't show up in our reports until May. So there's just a couple months in May that are COVID related. 2021 is really where you see the big impact for COVID. So we thought we could hold our own in 2022 and then kind of recover in 23, stay flat in 24, and then decline not quite as much in the out years because of the fuel efficient vehicles. Our actual revenue so far for 2022 is 5.3% or 18.5 more than projected. Now that's through February, so that's even more than half of the year. So our motor fuel tax is rebounding, adjusting back up to where it was pre-COVID, which is great news. So it matches what we projected. That slide there doesn't have anything to do with Senate Bill 262. And the reason why I didn't put it on there is because it would distort the historical data in this. So if we go to the next slide, this is just Senate Bill 262. And it shows how it grows. Keep in mind, it's 2.5 cents starting in 2022, which started October 1 of 2021. So we've only got 9 months of that first year in 2022. That's why that looks so small. And then starting July of this year, fiscal year 2023, that'll go up to 5, and then 7.5, then 10, and then 12, fully phased in 2026. The numbers here are what was used for the fiscal note. Anytime there's legislation going through the General Assembly, there's a committee on legislative research oversight. They're the ones that come up with the fiscal note. We were involved in kind of coming up with it too. But the way they came up with the number was they just took the gallons in 2020 and then applied the 2.5 cent increment as it increased. So there is no growth or there's no reduction. It's just the same gallons used in each one of these years. The only difference is the incrementally 2.5 cents is added until it's fully phased in. Now, Senate Bill 262 has a revenue option in it. If you don't want to pay this 2.5 cents, you have the ability to request a refund. Now, refunds are requested from July 1 to September 30th for prior year purchases. So that's going to start in 2023. That's why you don't see any refunds in 2022. And we show the refunds on here in that blue part of this bar chart. We've assumed 20% of the revenue will be requesting refunds for it. Now, again, that's just an assumption. Refunds can be anywhere from 0 to 100%. Come July 1 through September 30th of this year, we could get a request to refund all of the 54 million that was collected the year before. We're just going to have to wait and see. The Department of Revenue is going to provide us the exact number of the refunds so we can start collecting that data to be able to provide the projections. Right now, this is just a guess on it right now. The amount that MoDOT will get a keep, we think, is the assumption is the green bar part of this. It grows from 54 million all the way up to 303 million, and then goes down to 288 in 2027. And I've had a lot of people say, well, why does it go down in 27? It's fully phased in 2026. And it's a great question. Look at the blue part of the bar, though. In 2026, we think we're going to refund 58 million. In 2027, we think we're going to refund 72 million. The total is the same, adding the green and the blue together. However, keep in mind in 2027, the prior year is the full 12.5 cents that the refund is based on. So that's why it goes down a little bit in that out year. All right, next slide. Another revenue source that MoDOT, that Missouri uses to finance our roads and bridges is a motor vehicle sales tax. When you buy a car, you pay that sales tax, a state sales tax of 4.225%. 2.96% of that tax goes to MoDOT for roads and bridges. This represents 25% of our state revenue. Prior to 2021, which I'll talk about in a minute, our highest amount we had received was $362.2 million in 2018. Now, the actual revenue here, this one actually gives us a pretty good trend line. From 2011 to 2017, the motor vehicle sales tax grew at about 5% every year, which was great. It started to kind of stall out, though, in 18 and 19. So in 2021, that red line, we forecasted that it was going to have, that COVID was going to have a negative impact on motor vehicle sales taxes. We thought that we would maybe get 1% growth, not the 5% we've had in the past from 2020 to 2021. And then 2% from 20 to 23, and then in the out years, back up to about a 3% growth. So growing, but not at the rate it had on the left side of the chart there. The actual impact of COVID was positive, though, which really surprised all of us. People bought vehicles with their stimulus checks. Well, back then we didn't know we were going to get all these stimulus checks, I guess. But the savings from staying at home, from eating at home, not going to the movie, you had all this extra money. People put it in cars, which was great for us. Our motor vehicle sales tax spiked to $443.5 million in 2021. That's the highest it has ever been. Probably as high as it's going to be for a while. The 2022 forecast, that green line, we did not think we were going to be able to continue that trajectory up like it was. What we thought was, if we could go back to a pre-COVID level, kind of that 2020 level, and then maybe get a 3% growth, that's kind of where a 22 number would be. And then from 23 and 24, have about 2% growth, and then in the out years have a 3% after that. And sometimes it's good to be lucky. The actual revenue for 2022 is 5.7%, or about 13.8 million more than we projected. So the motor vehicle sales tax revenue is adjusting back down to where it was pre-COVID, exactly kind of where we projected on this thing. The spike is great. We got the revenue, but we knew long term it wasn't going to continue like that. Next slide, please. The last highway user fee that we get is motor vehicle and driver's license fees. Many of these fees date back to the 1980s, which is incredible to think about that they're that old, but this represents about 20% of our state revenue. Prior to 2021, our highest amount was $304.8 million in 2019. The actual revenue, this one's always kind of hard. It's kind of a jagged line. And the reason why it is like that is, you can get your plates for, 1 year, or you can go like I do 2 years because I hate going to the DMV. I'm so glad you can do it online now. And then with different licenses, you can get them for like 6 years, or some younger kids get them for 1 year or 2 years or whatever. So there's different increments. And we know the total registered drivers, but not knowing exactly what year time frame their licenses are, it makes this kind of jagged. Something else that kind of confuses this chart up a little bit. You guys remember a little while back we got bicentennial license plates. Well, there was an additional fee that was added to those plates. MoDOT actually got that additional fee. It shows up in 2019 was additional $10 million. And then in 2020 was $6.1 million, which sounds like a great deal, but we also got the cost of manufacturing the plates too. So it kind of offset it. But if you look at this chart, that's why in those years, the revenue kind of goes up for that. The 2021 forecast, we assumed a negative impact of COVID. So there was only about a 1% growth on our projection. The actual impact of COVID, though, was positive, because if you're going to buy all those vehicles, you got to go get them registered and get new plates. So with the increase in motor vehicle sales, the associated registrations went up too. And it spiked just like the sales tax. It all went all the way up to almost $332 million, the highest it's ever been. That's a 12.1% increase, or $35.8 million comparing 2020 to 2021. So the 2022 forecast, the current one, we again kind of did what we did with the motor vehicle sales tax. We assumed we'd go back to a pre-COVID kind of a level in 2020 with about 1.5% growth. That's where we landed the 2022 estimate, and then 1.5% growth from 2023 and beyond. The actual revenue so far through February, it's coming in like we projected. It's 2.3% more, or $4.5 million more than we projected through February. So this revenue is adjusting back down to the pre-COVID level also. Next chart, please. So what this chart does is it kind of takes all those revenues and for the state side and lumps them all together, kind of showing a total and then comparing it to last year. Our state revenue represents 50% of our total revenue. So half of the revenue coming into this department is shown on this chart. And our state revenue is $1.2 billion more than the prior year forecast. And that is attributable to Senate Bill 262, the state money coming in for that extra motor fuel tax. And this chart shows you that dotted blue line there. If we didn't have Senate Bill 262 in there, it's more or less right on top of the red line from last year. But it is increasing, and that is good news for transportation revenue. The next chart talks about the federal revenue, and this is 45% of our total revenue. The other 5% is bonding and other things, but this is 45%. So this makes up a big amount of the revenue coming into the department. These are our federal reimbursements, and these are $1.9 billion more than the prior year forecast. And that increase is coming from the new Federal Authorization Act, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. People refer to it as IJA. And it's also referred to it as a bipartisan infrastructure bill. I've been doing federal bill analysis for 33 years. I've never seen a federal highway bill that's known as two names, but I guess we do now. You can either call it IJA or you can call it bill. It means the same thing. The IJA or bill is estimated to give Missouri 26% more in our annual apportionments compared to the last federal reauthorization, which was called the FAST Act. So the last year of the FAST Act was in 2021. So that's what we're comparing to. This financial forecast starts off with how much you can actually obligate of the federal apportionments. And then the financial forecast then goes from there on the federal aid projects, tries to determine how quick they're going to pay out. And then we will get the federal share, which is usually 80% federal reimbursement as those projects are built and as costs are incurred. So we talk about federal revenue reimbursements and we talk about the obligation. You'll hear two different things, and those are two different numbers. Next slide, please. What this slide shows is just a summary of the current financial forecast. You've got the revenues in red and the disbursements in blue, and then the green is the ending cash balance in the state road fund. And as you can see there, we are deficit spending in all the years except 2023. The only reason why this doesn't show up as a deficit spending in 2023 is this forecast has got a Amendment 3 bond issuance of $500 million planned. And for this chart, that shows as revenue. So it's in that red line for 2023. And again, I kind of talked about this earlier, where we balance the budget, the forecast over the 5-year period. Now, as you can see, we are deficit spending, and some might think, well, that's not a balanced budget. Well, it is, because we have a cash balance and we want to spend that cash balance down. We want that money to be out on the roads and bridges for those improvements. So that shows you how it's going to be spent down from as high as almost 1.5 billion in 23 with that bond issuance, all the way down to the 251 million, which is our target, the minimum amount that we can go. So up until this point, we've been talking all about revenues. So the next slide, we're going to talk about where the money goes. And my gosh, with engineers, money flies out the door quick. Now, I'm just kidding. I know the majority of the people on here are engineers, and I know Kenny's an engineer, so I just do that for his benefit. Okay, let's talk about where the money goes. This stacked up chart here starts off with, it's kind of baby poop color, that orange at the bottom. That's our operating budget. Now that's for the districts and divisions, and 33% of that is us. It's people, it's our salaries. 31% are the fringe benefits that us people get. And then 36% is expense and equipment for materials and supplies. Now, when we build this operating budget, we take what we submit over to the General Assembly, the items that we have in our appropriation request. So in these operating budget numbers for personal services, we have the employee market adjustment salary increases, which you've heard leadership talk about. Keep in mind that was not supported by the governor. So the governor did give us a 5.5% COLA raise, though, which was really cool. Another item that we have in our proposed budget over at the Capitol across the street is program delivery workforce expansion of 105 employees. We've requested the ability to expand our workforce by 105 employees because of our larger construction program that we have in the next 5 years. We asked for 4 more bodies to help implement the new accounting system. And it also has 2% COLAs, cost of living adjustments, in every year from 23 all the way to 28. Now, keep in mind that's planned. I'm not telling you you're going to get a 2% COLA every year, but we need to have that into the forecast. That way, if it's approved, we've got money set aside for that. Now, all the items that I've just discussed all have to be approved by the General Assembly. And if they're approved by the General Assembly, which session is, they're actually on recess, but they come back next week, which will continue to debate our budget and all the departments' budgets. They would have to approve all this. The governor would have to sign it, and the commission would have to approve it. But as we build the operating budget, those are the items that are in it. Fringe benefits, I mentioned, is 31%. It's a pretty big number of that orange band there. A lot of people don't realize for every dollar for salaries, MoDOT puts 58 cents in the retirement fund for the employee, which is a great thing. It's a great benefit when you get to retirement age, but MoDOT does have to put money away for that, which is shown up here. Medical projections, we all know medical costs keep going up. And then the other benefits for unemployment taxes, workers' comp, Social Security, all that is in that 31% number. Expense and equipment, materials and supplies, we've got additional $5 million in here for inflation for roadway materials, which we know it's probably going to be more than $5 million, but at least it's something to place in here to help offset some of that increased cost. We have $4.2 million for improvements to rest areas, $1 million for all of our winter operations crews that are going from southeast to southwest district or northwest as we move people around because we're such short staffed when we have these storms. I hope we never have a storm that hits all the state at the same time. But for right now, we're moving people around, which costs a lot of money, about $1 million. We've increased the operating budget. $1.7 million for way station improvements and radio tower maintenance. A one-time increase of $5 million for our little problem we're having with dump trucks that like the tilt bed to go up as we're going down the road. Starting in 2024, there's a $10 million increase for fleet replacement and $2 million for information systems. And in the operating budget here, 22, 23, and 24, there's the maintenance asset management deficit program of $15 million for low volume roads. So that's kind of the information for the operating budget. Now, the majority of the money we spend here is in that blue band in the construction program. That's where our contractor payments are as projects are built and as contractors submit progress invoices. This is growing along with our contractor awards, which we'll discuss later. The local public agencies, which we call pass-throughs, when they build a project, they submit the federal share through MoDOT. We get the federal reimbursement for them through the Federal Highway Administration and pass it back through the local entity for off-system bridges, STP for local streets, transportation alternatives, CMAQ, all that stuff is growing because about 15.5% of all the federal aid that comes to Missouri, which we just talked about, the federal act is growing. 15.5% of that goes to the local agencies through the pass-through. So that is growing along with our program. The design bridge consultants, the DBC budget is in that blue band there. Last year, that was set at about $60 million. The DBC budget is actually growing from 60 all the way up to $100 million during this 5-year time period. And right-of-way acquisitions previously was just $20 million flat. Now it's up to $25 million each year. So that is growing too. So that's why that blue band is growing, and it's the majority of what we spend. But we'll talk about the contractor awards in a later slide. The yellow area there is debt service. That's just based on our annual payments for our outstanding bonds. Currently, we have $1.46 billion outstanding in bonds. Our original bonding, which started, way back in the early 2000s, those are actually going to be all paid off next year in 2023. When we did that, I thought, wow, 2023 is a long ways off. Well, we're here, and those are going to be paid off. We still have Amendment 3 bonds that'll be paid off in 2029, the current issuance anyway. And then the Garvey, which is the federal-backed bonds that were sold for the Mississippi River Bridge in St. Louis, I-64 project, and Safe and Sound. Those are paid off in 2033, so we got a ways to go on those. In that yellow area, that's where we pay for the, most recently, the Governor's Focus on Bridge program. That was that program where we were going to jump in there and do a bunch of bridges, and we were going to accelerate the program by the General Assembly approved general revenue to pay for debt service. They wanted us to bond $201 million, $301 million of that program, and they would give us general revenue, which was great, to pay that off over a 7-year period. So from 21 to 27, there's about $45.5 million each year to pay those bonds back. We also have an MTFC loan. We borrowed money to help with the financing for the Roachport I-70 bridge project. It helped us leverage the infra grant that we got for that project. It's the payments are $9.2 million over a 7-year period during this window. And the Amendment 3 debt service that we're planning to do in 23, that's going to cost, the $500 million issuance will cost about $55 million a year for 10 years starting in 2024. So that's in these numbers. I caution you, though, that is in the plan. We will watch it closely to see if we actually do it in 2023 or move that out. If you haven't already heard, there are bills to repeal Senate Bill 262 to take away the 12.5-cent gas tax that was approved last year. So we're watching that very closely during session. If something like that would happen, we would have to redo the forecast and see if that would really make sense to actually do the bond issuance. But as the forecast is right now, as the STIP development is, that bond issuance is in there. I keep talking about Amendment 3. Good grief, it was almost 20 years ago when that was passed. I know we've got a lot of new employees. A little bit about Amendment 3, because you'll hear that talked about. That was passed in 2004. Prior to 2004, half of the motor vehicle sales tax went into the general fund. Half of it went to MoDOT and half of it on the state side went to the general fund. And it was used for the other departments, whether it was health or social services or whatever. In 2004, it went to the vote of the people, and the vote of the people said, let's redirect that existing tax. It wasn't an additional tax that was levied. It was just the existing tax was redirected from the general fund to MoDOT to be used for roads and bridges. It was phased in over a 4-year time period from 2006 to 2009. So it grew 25% every year till it was fully phased in. The unique part of that is the revenue does not go into the state road fund. It goes into a special account, the state road bond fund, and can only be used for debt service payments. So when Amendment 3 was passed, it got put in this fund that the intent was we would issue bonds and then we would build the projects to accelerate them, and then we would pay that back over time with the money that would go into the state road bond fund. The other piece that was a good thing was Prior to that, whatever Department of Revenue charged us to collect all these fees, we had to pay. Amendment 3 came up with a cap that limited the Department of Revenue costs of no more than 3% of what they collected. So that was a good thing. And Amendment 3 revenue is about $190 million per year. It is quite a bit of money that goes into the State Road Bond Fund. So as we pay off the previous Amendment 3 bonds, that revenue is going to continue to be dumped into that State Road Bond Fund. So we will be bonding again eventually, whether that's in 2023 or 24 or whenever, to use up that revenue that can only be used for debt service. The last part of this chart, that green bar up there, is other state agencies. Per the Constitution, the Department of Revenue and the Highway Patrol are paid out of our highway user fees. The Highway Patrol enforce the laws on our roads and bridges, and the Department of Revenue collects our user fees. We have to forecast how much we think that's going to be. The majority of that money goes to the Highway Patrol. Of that number you see there, like in 2022, the $291 million, 93% of that goes to the patrol, and 7% goes to the Department of Revenue. We base this on historical data, and it usually grows about 1.3% each year, but we have to show that as a disbursement out of MoDOT. All right, next slide, please. We talked about contractor payments on the previous slide, and contractor payments are tied to the contractor awards. They're two separate numbers, but they are connected. Now, the contractor awards last year, shown on the red line, we were bouncing around the $1 billion mark, which I thought, wow, that is incredible. We're able to withstand a $1 billion program. Well, lo and behold, this year, with all the additional state money from Senate Bill 262 and the federal money from ISR or bill, whichever you want to call it, the contractor award line took a big jump. Consistently over the next 5 years, our contractor awards are going to be $1.53 billion. And I know we've got a lot of program delivery people on this webinar. You've got plenty of job security if you want to stick around. We're going to be really busy. I'm a numbers guy. I'm a math guy. I can't help myself. That's $127.5 million awarded each month for 60 consecutive months to be able to hit these numbers over this 5-year period. And I know that's a heavy lift. That's why we increased the DBC budget to help with some of these plans. It's the biggest construction program we have ever had. So it's great to have money. I'm hoping we can figure out our staffing issues to keep people, the turnover down, so we're able to deliver this, because that's a lot of road and bridge work that needs to be done in the state. I talked a little bit about the contractor awards and contractor payments. One thing that people don't realize is we come up with how much we can afford based on how much we can award. We award $1.53 billion, and then financial services comes up with an assumption. How quick is that going to pay out? A big bridge project is going to pay out over numerous years. A resurfacing project is going to pay out in 6 to 9 months within a construction season. We take all those projects and then we kind of have a curve of how quick that's going to pay out, and the federal reimbursement coming back in to determine how much we can afford. So it's based on the cash flow, but you got to come up with how much you're going to actually award to begin with. So we technically don't have to have $1.53 billion in the bank in 2023. We just have to make sure we've got the money in the bank when the progress invoices come in to pay for those contracts. It's all about cash flow, making all this work. I know that kind of confuses people at times, because we will probably, well, you can see on that previous chart, we're never going to have a balance of 1.5 billion plus in the road fund. We just estimate and hope and pray the money comes in right at the right time as the money goes out. It's all about timing the cash flow. And that's what causes, people to lose hair. Like Kenny, loses hair because he's worried about this, and I feel bad for him, but where your hair gets gray. But we'll see how all this goes in the future. All right, the next slide, which is the last slide you have to put up with me, and then I'm going to turn you over to Janelle. But I had to take this opportunity to put a plug in for these two AASHTO award-winning publications. On the left there is the Transportation Funding, the Citizens Guide, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. This is updated annually in November. Both these documents are. The Citizens Guide is kind of the story type paragraph talking about funding in Missouri. It's going to have the most recent fiscal year data in there. So this one here has the 2021 data in it. A lot of graphics in here. This is where you get the bucket graphics that we use quite a bit. That's nested all the way through this document. Then on the one on the right, the one on the left has been around 5 or 6 years. This was actually a document that Patrick, he actually had that, the director had it similar in New Hampshire. And when we came here, he had us develop it, which has been a great, great tool to help people understand funding. And I think it's a real big reason why a lot of the additional funding has come to Missouri recently, is because we've been able to educate them with this document. The document on the right, the financial snapshot, that's been around for 20 plus years. It's actually an appendix now to the Citizens Guide. This is going to have historical information in it, a lot of tables with the 5-year history. It's got overviews about state funding, federal funding, our bonding program. There's some good charts in there and kind of walks you through all the bonding that we've done. The local sharing of highway user fees, how much goes to cities and counties, and kind of a history of that. Tax rates for transportation revenues, variables associated with transportation revenues like gallons of diesel fuel, gas, all the different years, and you kind of see trends on that. Number of vehicles registered in the state, number of drivers, all that kind of data that we can use as a what if to try to determine transportation revenues. We actually have a section in there if you want to look to see if we increased it by 5 cents for the motor fuel tax, this is how much it would generate. If we increase the sales tax we pay, or increase our fees for registrations, driver's license, things like that. We actually have a calculator out on the website. I know during Senate Bill 262 and even prior to that, when they come up with plans in the General Assembly, they'll actually use our calculator to plug in different scenarios. If it goes up 2 cents, 5 cents, 10 cents, or whatever, it'll automatically calculate how much would go to the state, how much would go to cities and counties. And it actually tells you an average motorist would pay X amount per month and per year if it went up that amount. The last page on the financial snapshot is a funding flow chart that shows as the money comes in, what fund it goes through as it cascades down and goes all the way into the state road fund. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's all about the information I wanted to share with you. I'm going to turn it over to Janelle Lucanati, who's going to talk to you about the budget process. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. That was very good. Todd, he mentioned a lot about planning. The financial forecast is our plan. I'm going to talk to you about the budget process, which is our spending authority. That is what we're going to spend in a fiscal year. So on this first slide, I'm going to talk about the budget process because there's a lot of times where if you talk to me, I will get confused on what fiscal year we're in. And the reason why is because we are typically working on 3 different fiscal years all at the same time. So this chart will kind of show some of that overlap. So in January of 2022, that is when the financial forecast was presented to the commission. So we presented it to them in January. We also are waiting on the governor to provide his recommendations for our FY23 budget. He usually does that during the State of the State address, which is usually around the middle of January, kind of around the 19th or so. And so he recommends to us what our spending authority for fiscal year 2023 is going to be. Then that begins the legislative session, which goes January through May. So between January through May, we have budget hearings over at the Capitol in which the General Assembly reviews our budget, makes their recommendations, and a budget has to be passed. It's usually like the first week of May. I think it's that first Friday of May, maybe, that they have to pass the budget. So for FY23, we will find out what spending authority we receive in May. In February, we start FY23 Spring Refresh. Spring Refresh is the allocation method that we give to districts and divisions stating what their spending authority can be. We analyze how much we can afford. That's when we reach out to you and we ask you how much, if you need any budget increases for FY23, things like that, because we are looking to see how much money do we need and what are we going to spend. So that's going on between February and June. In June, then we will have our FY23 budget. So we will take that to the commission for approval because we'll have what the legislature passed, and take that to the commission and let them know, here's what the General Assembly said that we can spend in FY23. Then July 1 of 23, the new fiscal year begins. So we have our spending for that. In June, we start working on our FY24 budget. So kind of have to have our crystal ball and know what we're going to spend in FY24, recognizing that we just are in FY22, getting ready for FY23, and now we're planning for FY24. We have to put the budget book together. It's due to the General Assembly by October 1st. So that's why we usually start it back in June to start thinking about what are we going to spend in 24. That's hard to do because we don't know. There's a lot we don't know. There's going to be grants we may get. There's new funding sources, different things we just don't know. But we do the best we can with what we do know. In September, we take our FY24 budget request to the commission and let them know what we're going to ask for in the budget book that we deliver on October 1st. So we receive that approval. And then come January of 23, we start all over again. And so we'll take the next financial forecast to the commission and present that to them. We'll wait for the state of the state for the FY24 recommendation from the governor. And then it starts again. So that's kind of the timeline and how things overlap and why we ask for certain things when we do, because there's always a due date, and that's why we always ask so far in advance. If somebody wondered, why are you asking me this? That's 18 months from now, or that's the process we have to go through. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is the appropriations request. Okay, so I said we start this in June, and we work on getting any new items that we need to fund or spending authority that we need. We start putting into this book. We use the financial forecast. We use numbers out of there because that's our plan. So we use those numbers. We use the spring refresh submissions that we receive from the districts and the divisions to pull all of this together. The budget book is for FY23. It was approximately 750 pages. It contains lots of charts. So if you're a chart person, you would love the budget book. Those of us that are not chart people, such as me, it's difficult. But we also have to describe every single program, and this is our way of telling the legislature why we need this spending authority. What programs do we have? Why do we need the ability to spend money on these items? What's the benefit to the Missouri citizens? So it's our way to tell our story to the legislature. It's broke up into sections. We have the administration section, which is like financial services, CCO, things like that. We've got the safety and operations section, which is our maintenance. We've got program delivery, which is contractor pays, right away, DBC, that kind of stuff. We've got FFIS, which is our facilities, our fleet, and our information systems. And then we have multimodal. So it's broke up into those sections. It contains PS information. So PS is our personal service. That's what we pay people. It contains fringe benefits, which are the benefits that we pay on those personal services. It contains E&E, our expense and equipment expenditure information. It also contains programs, so grants and contractor pays, things like that. The legislature, so once we submit this book to the legislature, they review it. The governor in January will make his recommendations. And then the legislature will decide if they agree with the governor, if they don't agree with the governor. Session is it's a unique time. A lot of legislature people will have their own agendas. Some of them want low volume roads taken care of. A lot of questions we get about trash pickup in their districts, or if they get a complaint from one of their constituents, they bring that up during our budget hearings. And so budget hearings can be unique in that you just don't know what they're going to bring up on a given day. And so we have to be prepared to answer that because we have to justify the funding. And so they a lot of times will have their own agenda on what they want our budget to be, and we have to work through the process. So they can cut items without even asking us or really understanding the impact of what that would do to Missouri, or they can add things and not understand by giving us this spending authority, we may not have the people to be able to deliver that. Or there's just, a lot of times there's times they just don't talk to us, and so they just do things. There is also a supplemental process that we go through during this same time frame in which we can ask for, if we do receive a grant or something where we need some additional spending authority for that particular fiscal year, we can ask for it in a supplemental process. The problem with the supplemental process is that it's not approved usually until April-ish, and you have from April until June 30th to spend the money. So for us, projects can take multiple months in order to do. So we struggle because that doesn't give us enough time to spend it. So the supplemental process is not ideal for the way that MoDOT operates, but it is there. So, if we were running short on, given the fuel price increases, if we were running short and we needed some additional spending authority to purchase more fuel, that would be okay. But if we needed spending authority to replace a bridge, that can't be done, in a couple months. That's going to take time. So that's the supplemental process. You'll hear us talk about a lot on the appropriations about changes that have occurred as far as EASE. We used to have EASE, which was Estimated Appropriation Authority. That would allow us to transfer spending authority from one appropriation, say a PS appropriation, say we had excess because of turnover, and we wanted to move it to E&E to pay for some fuel because of the rising fuel prices. We could do that. We had that capability. And so that was all good, fine and dandy. Well, they took that away. And so now we don't have that. So we can't move appropriation authority, spending authority from PS to E&E unless we get flexibility language. And that's very hard to get. The legislature does not give that up. We struggle with trying to explain to them, we could have a bad winter and we could pay out a lot in overtime. And so we may need to shift some appropriation authority there. and they're just not real willing to do that. So you'll hear that terminology used because when we did have the estimated appropriation authority, the E's, we could make those business decisions and it was fine. But today, in today's world, we can't. And so you'll hear the appropriations are tight or the capacity, we don't have the capacity to do those things. And it's because we can't move it. Once they put it in an appropriation bucket, we don't have that authority to just move it where we need it based upon what's happening in today's world. So just a heads up there. Just to give you kind of a magnitude, you know, Todd was talking about the different numbers in the financial forecast. The FY23 budget request was approximately $4 billion. That's the highest it's been. But with all that new revenue coming in, we have to be able to spend it. So we have to up our spending authority in order to spend all that new revenue. So just to kind of give you a magnitude of that. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the budget structure. All right, so you hear a lot of these terminologies. So I'm going to try to kind of explain my little circles here. So fund is where all that revenue that Todd was talking about gets deposited. So the revenue that we receive from motor vehicle sales tax, motor fuel, driver's license fees, all that stuff he was talking about gets deposited into a fund. Most of that all goes into the road fund, but we have other funds as well. There's, you know, the aviation trust fund and things. So the statute or Constitution will dictate what goes into those funds, what revenue sources go into those funds. Those are the funds that we use to make our expenditures. Okay, so we have to have the revenue first. So if the legislature says, okay, you asked for $4 billion, but you want to spend, I don't know, 8 billion, but we only have 5 billion in the fund, you can't spend more than what you have. Okay, so the fund is kind of like our bank account. That's how much money we have. And that's where it gets deposited. We currently have 13 funds. For FY22, there are 13 different funds that MoDOT has. The next circle inside the fund is the appropriation. So we ask for spending authority based upon the financial forecast. We ask for spending authority that we can accommodate within the amount of money we have in the funds. Okay. So that's where we go through, and that's the budget book. That's the appropriation. We ask for our spending authority. So that circle is inside the fund. Then the next circle, the budget allocation, that's how much that we say each division and district can spend. And we set that inside of the appropriation authority so that we have the room in case something unforeseen would happen. We have a little bit of a cushion there that we could appropriate out. We try to keep a 3% reserve for all of our appropriations. Some we can't. A lot of the PS appropes, the personal service appropes, we don't have 3% capacity in those. But we try to, because you just don't know what's going to happen. The rising material costs now, you know, for construction awards. And contractor pays, you know, that impacts some of that because, you know, whatever we had planned is now changed with the economy, things like that. So that's the way those work. So we try to, the budget allocation is the number that we assign out during spring refresh. And then if you ask for increases, it goes into that. That's what creeps that into the gray, the appropriation circle. It eats some of that circle up. So that's kind of how those all work. Okay, budget codes. I've talked about fund and I've talked about the appropriation. So the next thing is the org or organization. This tells us who spends the money. So when you get an invoice in, you put all of this coding on your invoice. And the reason why is because that tells us who's spending the money, what the money is for, and then it groups it in CM2 so that if we get asked, which we do, we get asked all the time, how much did this last snowstorm cost you? Newspapers love that information. And so we can then run budget activity class for R913, R914, which is snow and ice, and run a cost and say, okay, we spent X of personal service, fringe benefits, and then we can do an E&E cost. So just an FYI, these codes, so if somebody wanted to know how much the districts spend in fuel, we could run the org for the districts. We could use the budget activity class for fuel, and we could generate a report for that. So that's why your coding is so important, to make sure that you get the coding correct, because we do use that frequently for questions. The legislature asked, I think it was last session, how much did we spend on training? They wanted to know how much we spend on training. And so we had to run reports and stuff based upon that. So that's why this coding is so important to get right, is because we do use that for questions. All right, now I'm going to talk about Spring Refresh. So Spring Refresh, we just sent out in February for FY23. And we, when we send you your workbooks, you have to budget for personal services, fringe benefits, and expense and equipment. This is what we use to determine our spending for 23. You also see when we send you your workbook, there's a tab out there for FY24, and that's where you put known expenditures you're going to have in FY24, which we turn around and we use that when we put the appropriations book together. So that's why we ask you for that, if you know it at the time when you're filling out your Spring Refresh workbook. Divisions and districts have a core PS, personal service budget amount, and an expense and equipment, except for districts. Districts are different on expense and equipment. That core amount was set back in 2013, and it's been adjusted along the way for changes that have occurred. But that's the core number that we send out to you in your workbook, and we say, okay, you have X number of employees, and you've got X number of personal service dollars and X number of expense and equipment dollars. Fringe benefits, we calculate. We calculate that based off the personal service dollars that you, or the coding you give us for your personal service. So we calculate that for you. District's E&E is based off of a formula. We do 35% major lane miles, 35% minor lane miles, 20% VMT vehicle miles traveled, and 10% minor roads in poor condition. And so we use that analysis and we calculate how much expense and equipment dollars that the districts receive. We also are doing, as Todd mentioned in the forecast, $15 million for the maintenance asset management deficit program for low volume roads for 23 and 24. So those are included in there. All right. So here's a question I get a lot. Why don't we allocate the entire appropriation amount? So you saw the circles, the circle chart where we had the appropriation circle, and then inside of that we had the allocation. Again, if we gave out everything right up front, let's say during Spring Refresh, we give it all out. If something happened unforeseen, we had a horrible winter, we had a tornado, we had a flood, and we needed some additional spending authority, we'd have to take it away from someone. So if we gave it all out at the very beginning and something happens and we need that money back, we're going to have to take it from somebody. Well, it's easier to not give it out in the beginning than to go to someone and say, hey, can you give us, you're going to have to give up some dollars, because you've already planned that. You know, if you were given, you know, that'd be like, I don't know, your income tax refund. If you were planning on getting $5,000, you would plan on spending that, but you only got $2,000. It would be harder to not do whatever you had already planned. So it's easier if we just stick that to keep that 3% reserve for those unforeseen circumstances. There are some program approaches that we do fully allocate the whole thing. And that is because that money is passed through a lot of the multimodal programs. That money is passed through to transit providers and things like that. So we will allocate that full amount out because it's a formula base and that's how that program is set up. So we will do that. Okay, here's another question I get. How do the amounts in the STIP relate to the budget? All right, so here is a slide that shows. So the STIP on here is for 2022 to 2026 because that is the most recent approved STIP by the commission. It was approved last summer. The new STIP will be taken in this summer for it, which includes the numbers from the forecast that Todd was showing you. So in here, the STIP is prepared annually, and it shows the construction projects that will be awarded in the next 5 years. It includes, roads and bridges, transit, rail, aviation, waterways, freight, bicycle, pedestrian, and other projects. And the award amount is not cash out the door. So this amount is not what I put in the budget because that projects can cross over multiple years. But contractor pays, this is what we expect to pay out. So this is what I will include in the budget because again, the budget is spending authority. So I need to be able to have enough authority to spend these amounts. So that's how the STIP correlates to the budget. The budget is spending. So I want to know how much of that in the STIP, what is projected to be spent. And that's what I need to put into our construction program budget. Okay. All right, now we're going to talk about changes to the budget. So throughout the year, things come up, things happen, and we have to make some changes, okay? So these are the types of changes we will make. We'll do increases, we'll do transfers, we'll do reimbursements, and we do year-end analysis. Increases are just exactly what they are. If you need a budget increase, you fill out the increase form. If it is over 100,000, it has to be approved by executive leadership. If it's under 100,000, Todd can approve it, but you have to put on there why you need it, if it's one time or if it's going to be an ongoing increase. Keep in mind, we always have to check our appropriate capacity to see if we can afford it. Because that's dipping into that gray circle between the appropriation and the allocation. That's eating into that circle. So that's where those come from. Transfers, you just have to have the money available in your budget to transfer it. A lot of transfers I get are from the operating budget to the STIP. Districts transfer that. I get transfers, maintenance will transfer money to the districts. So there's a lot of transfers and stuff that go on throughout the year. Some stay within the same appropriation and some don't. Some go into a different appropriation. Reimbursements. We do semi-annual reimbursements twice a year. The types of items that we reimburse the districts, these are for districts, property damage, fuel used by other state agencies, fleet disposal, auction proceeds, sale of excess right-of-way, in-house warranty repairs, disaster reimbursements, and right-of-way leases. So those items, we run reports, we get those numbers, and twice a year we reimburse the districts for those costs. Those are costs that they did not plan for. They were unforeseen costs that they had to pay. So we'll reimburse their budgets for those. And then year-end analysis. Oops. We look at year-end analysis and analyze what surplus and deficit the divisions and districts have, and we will see what we can roll forward. We've got, PO rollovers and things. As the appropriations are getting tighter and tighter, this number has been limited on what we can and can't afford. Because again, we don't have the estimated appropriations, we don't have the ease, we just don't have near as much flexibility as we had in the past. So we are cutting back on how much we are allowed to roll forward. So my advice to everyone is spend your dollars in the year you're giving them so that, because there's no guarantee you will get to roll anything unspent in one fiscal year to the next. So, all right. Monitoring. So we have to monitor these budgets to make sure that we do not overspend. And so one of the things that we use, there's reports, a lot of the budget contacts, they keep an eye on things. But one of the reports we use here in financial services is the appropriation summary. And that report is attached in the Q&A section as one of the handouts for this webinar. And this is the appropriation summary report for February. The first 2 pages of that attachment list every single appropriation by category. So this is our personal services appropriations. These are our fringe benefit appropriations. These are our E&E appropriations. And then page 2 is our program appropriations. The budget amount on here is our appropriation amount given to us by the legislature. So that's what was approved. The allocation amount is the amount that we have distributed to the divisions and districts. And then the remaining is the amount for unforeseen circumstances. And then we show the percent. So like I said, a lot of these PS appropriations do not have 3% capacity remaining. We just don't have the ability to do that. So you'll see, this will show you each month, we run this report each month, what we have available. And so like when I said in the program approps, we appropriate all of that out, you'll see 0 budget remaining. We've given all that out to be spent in this fiscal year. The next pages are the breakdown for each division and district. So the first sections are the districts. It's broke up, if you wonder how it's sorted, it's broke up by chief officer. So Brenda's section is all together, all the divisions that report to Brenda is all together, all the divisions that report to Becky is all together, Eric, Lester, so on. So you'll see them grouped that way if you wonder why it's sorted the way it is. But the districts are listed first, and you'll see again, it's by personal service. So there's their appropriation. That's the type of appropriation it is. Here's the allocation. So that's how much was allocated by appropriation to the Northwest District. Here's their expenditures to date, and here's how much they have remaining. And then it's got the percent. So this report shows us how they're doing as far as spending their budget dollars. Are they ahead on spending? Are they behind on spending? And it monitors it by approach. Because again, remember, we don't have those E's, so I can't move money down here from administration E&E up here to administration PS if they've overspent PS. So we have to stay within these appropriations, the dollars given. Okay, so this report, and it's got, if you'll go through the attachment, it's got every division and district, and it's all broke out like this. Some divisions are only paid out of one PS appro, so that makes it easy. They don't have multiple. Because years ago, we used to, people would just manage to this $22 million for PS. They didn't have to worry about all these little breakdown by approach within that. But given the circumstances we're in now, we have to watch it by appropriation. So this report is very helpful to do that. And so it allows people to keep kind of an eye on how they're doing on their spending. And with that, that is all I have. So I'm ready to turn it back over to Kenny for any questions.
All right. Thank you, Todd and Janelle, for a great presentation. Apparently, this whole budget and forecasting thing is a lot more complicated than balancing my checkbook. So I appreciate the detail and history that you gave on this presentation because it's a lot more than I've ever heard. So I think it'll be really useful for those that are listening in today. So to kind of understand the why. So at this time, we'll take questions. We'll start with the Q&A pod that's out there. And it looks like we do have a couple questions here. So first one is, does the financial forecast account for increased electric vehicle adoption?
Yeah, Janelle, can you go back to slide 4?
I can,
Yeah, we've been watching the electric vehicle market for a number of years. Um, as you can see there, the last year's forecast in the red line and then the green line, the current one, if you look in the out years start to drop, and that's why we have a decline. It's very unique. You've got VMTs going up, you've got fuel efficiency going up, and you've got more electric vehicles coming into the market. They aren't going to be paying gas taxes at all. So we've been watching this 20 plus years of when this is actually going to hit. I'm shocked that I'm pull up at the traffic signal here in Jeff City and I've got Tesla sitting next to me. I lived in Overland Park for 4 years and it wasn't a big deal up there, but you're starting to see electric vehicles all over the state. Keep in mind, when we put this forecast together, we come up with our best guess. We update it every year. So every year we get another slice at trying to figure out the next 5 years. And the other safety net in our back pocket is on the STIP. We don't fully program projects in year 4 and 5. We don't put projects against that dollar amount. We only 50% is the most we do. So if for whatever reason we think like this forecast in 26 and 27, we think the motor fuel tax is going to be 511.7 and then tail off to 510. If we have an oh crap moment in 2026 and that thing drops drastically down into the $400 million range, we'll be able to see that coming a little bit better and then be able to react with not having the pull projects because we only program at 50%. But yeah, we do. The whole electrical vehicle thing, I've been watching that for decades now, thinking it's coming, it's coming. Well, it's actually here. And I think the motor fuel tax is, COVID screwed it all up, but I think it's around a 500 to 510 kind of area normally, and then it's going to tail off from there. So that's how we kind of account for it. In the out years, we start to drop off as not a growth rate, but a reduction rate. Great question, Zeke.
So Todd, my understanding is there some kind of registration fee for electric vehicles, and do we get a portion of that?
Yeah, we do, but it's not much. The Senate Bill 262 actually has an alternative fuel vehicle decal on it. The problem is we don't have a lot of great data to know exactly how many of those vehicles are. I think in long term, when we do turn over and everybody's driving electric vehicles, it'll show us that it will switch over to it. But for right now, we're just going to continue to ride the motor fuel tax revenue.
All right. The next question is, as you know, there is a lawsuit where the commission filed a lawsuit against the Office of Administration. And the question is, how will the process change if the courts determine MoDOT is not subject to legislative appropriations?
Yeah, that's a great question. Now, we really don't know exactly how that looks, so I'm going to give you how it looks to Todd. So you can take that for whatever it's worth. I think we will continue to submit the budget the same way we do now. We will put together the appropriations request in the fall. I'll present it to the commission. October 1, we'll submit a budget to the Office of Administration. We will still go through the session like we are now. However, I see this playing out that what we present, they're not going to be so-called monkeying with it. They're not going to look at it and say, we want to cut 100 positions, MoDOT, line item stuff out. in the old days, we used to submit our budget and nobody asked us any questions, and we went on and did what we needed to do to build the roads and bridges. I think that's where we're going to get. The commission is going to have the authority to, if they want to give raises, if they want to spend more on this or that, they'll have the ability to do that. I do think we'll still go through the process, though, of putting the appropriations request together, because after it gets approved, that's the document that gets put into SAM2 and the accounting system and on down the line. Your question is very optimistic there, though. It's when it happens, so we'll see.
All right. Next question is from me. We talked a little bit, Janelle kind of showed those bubbles that were out there. What is the process for a supplemental appropriation and how long does that take?
It's the same process as the regular appropriation process. During the summer, when we start figuring out what items we need to ask for in our appropriations request, we're either going to ask for it in the current year or in the next year. So right now, we've got a supplemental request for FY22, and we have the appropriations request for FY23 for next year. It's the same process. When I presented in September down in Springfield, the appropriations request, it had both of those in it. I don't know if you realize it, but we were requesting the ability to submit the supplemental at that time and the annual appropriation. It makes its way through the General Assembly the same way. The same committees will look at it and determine approval or denial. The thing that I think is, now the whole process is not real efficient over there, but nobody asked me that part. The supplemental comes to you in May. So you pretty well have to have it spent, hoping you get it, to be able to put the expenditures to get against it in May and June, and boom, your fiscal year is over. So as far as the timing of it, it's not real efficient as far as I'm concerned. But the process of getting it approved is the same exact way. We go over there to hearings for the supplemental the same way we do as the regular annual appropriation request, and follow it through the process until it gets approved or denied and comes out the other end.
All right, I don't see any other questions in the question and answer pod. So WebEx allows you to raise your hand, and we can go ahead and unmute you to ask a verbal question. So if anybody has a verbal question, please raise your hand in WebEx and we'll unmute you. But while you're doing that, I do have another question. So
we're going to limit questions to one per person, Kenny, until we get to everybody.
I think Janelle was talking about, because our appropriation is so limited right now, and the lack of easing kind of limits how much flexibility we have in our budget. So how does that work for the districts? We have a lot of program delivery staff on this webinar. If they have, project awards that are less than the planned program amount for a year, is that swept at the end of the year, or how does that work?
Well, as far as the appropriation's not technically swept. It's a 12-month shelf life for the appropriation. What happens though, if we have award savings, let's say we plan to do 1.1 billion in awards, and we only do 900 million, that so-called cash that we thought we were going to pay out, it's still in the road fund. And so when we start up the next forecast, our cash balance is going to be higher than we thought because we didn't award as much. So we technically don't lose the money. It's still in the road fund, but we get to a point where we have to ask for more appropriation in future years to be able to spend down that balance that might be accruing because we didn't spend it in the year that we originally thought.
All right, thanks, Todd. Looks like we have Keith Smith maybe has his hand raised. Can you unmute for us, Charlotte? Charlotte, were you able to?
Well, it doesn't. I am not able to unmute him first.
Well, Keith Smith, he's kind of a wild stallion. You probably don't want him talking on a WebEx like this. You don't tell him what he might say. It's probably just wired into the program that they see his name and don't allow it.
All right, looks like you're unmuted, Keith.
Wasn't letting me unmute either.
All right.
Okay, this is sort of a commiseration sort of question because you guys have to deal with so many things that might happen or might not happen. Here in the last few days, I'm hearing that something I suppose won't happen, but it sounds like it might. The federal government is thinking about not collecting the federal gas tax because of the big increase in gasoline prices. And I was just wondering, how fast do you suppose you could respond to something like that? Of course, it would depend on how long it would last and all sorts of details I wouldn't know anything about. No one's decided on anyway. But how fast could you respond to something like that? That seems like that'd be such a big deal.
Yeah, that's kind of a big deal. Our federal revenue is 50% of our money coming into this thing, or 45%. Not to dogpile your question, but we actually have a bill over across the street in the Capitol that they're thinking about a 6-month suspension of the state gas tax too. I don't think that's the right thing to do right now with the economy. The federal gas tax is 18.4 cents for gas and 24.4 for diesel. I just told you guys about the big increase in the reauthorization that is funded with the Highway Trust Fund receipts, which is the gas tax. If the scholars in DC come up with another funding source from general revenue to fill that gap, then the answer for me is, well, it won't affect us at all. If they cut our federal funding by a certain amount, I mean, if you're talking 6 months, that's half of our funding. So instead of getting $1 billion worth of federal revenue, you're going to get 500. Yeah, that's a screeching halt. We would not be able to continue with the program we've got. I do know of an individual here in the department that I call director that is very, very in tune to what's going on in DC. So if this was to happen, I would assume he'd be up here pretty quick and then we'd be scurrying around to figure out what we're going to do. Haven't heard anything from him, so I'm not thinking that it's probably going to happen. I've read a lot of stuff about that would be the worst thing you could do to the economy right now. The same way with the state gas tax, if we were to suspend that for 6 months, that would be roughly $350 million. That's a lot of money. Consequently, the highway patrol gets paid out of that account too, so maybe we wouldn't have as many patrol on the street for those 6 months. I'm not sure how we would figure that out, but we have been asked to do the fiscal note on that if we were to suspend it from like July to December. That is an interesting thing. I know years ago when it got up to $4 a gallon, Illinois actually has a sales tax on their motor fuel. And halfway through the year, since the price was so high, they had collected all the revenue that they thought they were going to get since it was a percent of the sales price. And we were taking a lot of calls from people up in St. Louis saying, well, Illinois suspended their gas tax because the gas prices are so high. When's Missouri going to do that? We really, like I said, that's our cash cow. We really can't do without that motor fuel tax. If that was to happen, Keith, I really appreciate you bringing me up on a beautiful afternoon with the sun out there. If that was to happen, that would be catastrophic for the construction program. We would not be able to deliver the 1.5 billion construction program going forward. We would have to redo the whole forecast with different assumptions, taking all that revenue out. Take revenue out, you got to take the disbursements out because all of our forecasts are balanced. So I sure appreciate your pick me up there, Keith. You know, one guy had an optimistic approach about the lawsuit. Now you're bringing me down with this motor fuel tax suspension. So, but I'm just kidding. It's a good question. We'll have to wait and see.
I don't see any more questions or anybody having their hands up. So it looks like we're done with this question session here. So, you know, great news, great information that's out there. We're We're going to have a lot bigger program, which I think we all acknowledge that's going to be very challenging, but it's also great opportunities to make huge improvements to our Missouri highways and bridges that are out there. We've been wanting to do that for a long time, so it's a transformational opportunity that's really exciting for us to do that moving forward. We just got to figure out how we're going to step into those challenges and address some of the things that we know we have to address, and we're working on some of those right now. So appreciate that information. So if we didn't get to your questions on this topic today, please reach out to any of today's presenters. I hope today's presentation provided a better understanding of how MoDOT forecasts revenue and develops its budget. Thank you for participating in this webinar. We appreciate any feedback on how we can improve this format or the content of future webinars. As we wrap up this webinar, we will be registering you for participation in MoDOT U. So like I said early before we started the webinar, if you just had your first name in there, please send an email to Charlotte Drinkard, and she will make sure that she captures that in MoDOT U and make sure you get credit for this class. Also, if you are attending through a group or in a conference room or anything like that, and you did not log in directly through WebEx, please send that information to Charlotte as well. I want to remind everyone that our next webinar is on an overview of the geotechnical section. It is scheduled for April 5th. There is also a lunch and learn on the unique Route 141 at Route 364 interchange project on March 29th. This concludes our webinar for today. Thank you for your participation.